Welcome to Bleed Purple, a 10-part podcast about the 125-year history of Tarleton State University. Host Drew Myers will cover Tarleton's rich traditions, speak with notable alumni, and uncover the stories that give Tarleton its lasting legacy. Here's your host, Drew Myers.
Howdy, I'm Drew Myers, and this is the Bleed Purple podcast, the podcast that's telling the story of Tarleton State University through the stories of the people who bleed purple. Thank you guys for pushing play and listening. Always appreciated. It's my honor and privilege to sit down with two ladies, Miss Cindy Shipman and Miss Belle Dowell. How are you guys?
We're good.
You guys are here to talk about John Tarleton. And what I think is really cool about this, you guys mentioned to me before we hit record on this, that yesterday you guys were at the museum. And Belle, what did you guys spend? A couple hours? 2 hours?
Yeah, we did.
2 hours talking about John Tarleton. And now you get to do it with me on this podcast. I'm super excited about this. So where I want to start is just give people a million-mile overview of your background. Cindy, you don't like to refer to yourself as this, but this is me calling you a John Tarleton expert. But just tell people your story real quick and how you became an investigator for everything John Tarleton.
Okay, so I'm a retired teacher, and I went to school here at Tarleton. And one of my favorite professors was Chris Guthrie. And Chris did the Centennial book for Tarleton. And I read it really late, like maybe 2010 or 11, 12. And I was disappointed that all we had was the mythology about Tarleton. And I gave him a call and I said, look, I think I'm going to do some research on Tarleton. And he said, well, you'd be the person for it. And he said, I'll help you any way I can. And then he sickened and passed away on me. So in the meantime, I've done quite a bit of research. I've gone to Knoxville a couple of times. And I traveled, at the end of COVID, I traveled all through Missouri to every county he had federal lands in and dug up the documents and went and looked at the land. I think the USDA uses the pictures of some of his farms in their brochures because he could really pick a good agricultural spot.
That's awesome.
So that's kind of where I am. It's not publishable yet because there's still stuff to do. But
yeah, she mentioned.
So I know a lot.
She mentioned that she was still investigating.
Yes.
I love it. Now, Belle, talk about your story real quickly and then your ties to John Tarleton.
I became friends with Dr. C. Richard King. He was a local historian. He had taught down at the University of Texas, retired, and moved back to Stephenville. In the course of our friendship, he talked me into joining the museum board. And before long, I began to know more about Erath County and the history. And eventually, we were given the opportunity at the museum to get the John Tarleton Ranch House. And I made trips with him out there to get that house ready to be moved. And quite frankly, I didn't know how he was going to do it. But he was determined to save that house and get it on the museum grounds. And I met Cindy through the museum, and we've just had some real fun talks about John Tarleton.
Well, I'm excited about talking to you guys on this podcast about John Tarleton. So, Cindy, I'm going to throw it back to you. And I told you ahead of time that I was going to ask you this question. I want a good John Tarleton story. You got one for me?
I do. So we all know that John Tarleton had this unfortunate marriage where they agreed ahead of time not to share their resources. And they actually signed a prenuptial agreement. But I think John Tarleton, he was kind of a joker. He liked a good joke. And so they married one afternoon in Waco, had a little reception at her great big 3-story house, and went on down to the train station to start their honeymoon. They went to the World's Fair. And she said, John, have you got our tickets? And he said, I've got mine.
Oh, no.
Pretty sure that was a joke, but yeah, we hear that differently. So in the mythology of John Tarleton here on campus, we hear that he actually gave her an itemized bill at the end of the honeymoon that asked for her part of the expenses. But
you haven't been able to confirm that yet?
I haven't been able to confirm that part of the story yet. I like my part better.
I love that. Belle, did you know that story before Cindy shared it with you?
No, I did not. And that just led to a huge conversation on John Tarleton.
I love it. Is there a story that Cindy shared with you, Belle? Maybe it was yesterday or maybe it was before that really stands out to you that you really like?
No, I think that one is my favorite because I just heard, that he married a wealthy woman and they had a contract, and it was sort of dull. But when you hear about the train ride and the bill he handed her, that becomes different.
That's great. That's really funny. Cindy, let me ask you this. And during your investigating, and I love that you use that word when you're talking about John Tarleton, during your investigating, did you discover why education was so important to him?
I don't have a full answer for that, but I did discover, because we hear in the mythology that Tarleton was uneducated, but I know because I found records, he actually applied to the University of Eastern Tennessee, and he apparently couldn't get into their freshman class in 1845, but he was able to get into their preparatory school, and he spent the winter semester and then part of the summer semester in 45, 46, attending college. Later on, I found letters that he wrote to an attorney there in Knoxville, and he really needed a little more education.
Oh, really?
So apparently he had punctuation was beyond his writing skills. And so obviously he didn't get an education like maybe his intelligence would have suggested he needed. So I think that's why. I think that he was denied that and so felt like that was something he could help other people with. And even before he gave the money for Tarleton in his will, up at Patillo, the people there said that if they ran subscription schools in those days. They would run a short public school maybe for 2 or 3 months, but the teacher would stay on if the community would pay them, and they could always count on him to be a major donor for that. So I think you see that over and over in his life, that he knew it was his shortcoming and he didn't want it to be a shortcoming for somebody else.
That's wild to think about these letters that, where he struggled with punctuation, and then looking at Tarleton State University and what it has grown into. Yeah. That's an incredible ripple effect, right? And I think it's really neat. And I think it's really cool that you've kind of invested time and energy and resources, blood, sweat, and tears, I'm sure, into kind of unraveling this, kind of putting this puzzle
the pieces together.
Yeah. Why is that important?
Because the real story in my lifetime, you read a book, you go to a movie, the book is always better. That's true of the stories that we know, because we know these little shorthand stories about people and they're kind of funny for a minute, but what they did in their real lives is usually much more exciting and really more edifying than any little quick story that we could tell people. The real stuff's always the best.
I asked for a good John Tarleton story, and you shared a funny one. Do you have an inspiring one that you came across during your investigating?
An inspiring one? A lot of inspiring ones. He came to Knoxville as, I guess, a 20 or 21-year-old man, and he must have had a little bit of money with him, but he actually stuck with a job there at the Cowan and Dickinson store for over 30 years, even though he was probably richer than they were in these land purchases that he owned. So he could have lived the life of a rich man and chose to save his money for something bigger later on in life. That's really the land speculation part. Most of those guys turned their money over in 2 or 3 years, and they took the fast profits, and he left his money in for 30 or longer years even, and took that bigger profit for better good. I think that's very inspiring.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's switch gears a little bit. And Belle, I want to come back to you and go and talk about the John Tarleton Ranch House and talk about Dr. King and why that was so important, and just the thought process behind that and why that is such a treasure right here in Stephenville, Texas.
I think that Dr. King realized that history is so important, and he was very fond of Tarleton University, and he wanted to save what he was always wanting to save history. He thought that you learned from the history. You didn't repeat things if you were a scholar of history. And he was a man who knew from his research that John Tarleton had been a generous man. You know, Cindy mentioned Knoxville. He left money for a children's home there in his will. And Cindy and I were talking yesterday about all the things that Tarleton, how free he was with his money, what a generous person. He generally comes across as a very kind man. You know, you heard he was eccentric. You heard he was a little different. He lived in that ranch house alone. But, you know, he kept the love letters from his first wife. And it just makes him so human. And Dr. King realized that, and he thought that we needed the man who started Tarleton. We needed his home on those grounds. And I said earlier to you, I went out there with him and I was just like, we're going to move this. And there's a picture of it coming over the hill into Stephenville. And it looks like, Cindy and I discussed this yesterday, that if a big wind came through,
it was done.
It was done.
Yes.
It was off the trailer.
That is wild. What are some other logistics around the moving? I mean, just the thought of that seems overwhelming to me. I wouldn't even know how to start to move a house, especially one that's, you know, kind of in bad shape.
Oh, Dr. King knew how to number the boards and how to take all the pictures and all the angles and make sure the rocks were in the right place for everything. He was such a scholar of history, and he had moved other buildings. You know, he'd been a part of all of that. So, and of course, it was over at Patillo, or near Patillo, and that was a long drive to Stephenville. And I was just like, no, I'm not going to watch it be moved. I just can't do that. It's going to fall apart. And Cindy agreed. You know, we were just like, what a man who would think, oh, I'm going to do this.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Cindy, during your investigating, have you found out any fun facts about the ranch house? Have you come across any stories about the ranch house?
Not necessarily, except it was on the creek. It's on Buck Creek, and it's told by locals up there that he bathed in the creek every day. But
Okay, that's
we
good.
don't.
That's
we don't.
fun.
We don't really believe that. But that building itself was actually a one-room cabin, and very old. And the other rooms were added to it at two different times. It's really a three-room cabin with kind of a breezeway through them today. And the carpenter, David Williams, that put the building back together, he found all kinds of stuff down between the floorboards. He found a knife. He found old hardware pieces. I mean, just, you know, the junk that falls between the floorboards, I guess. But he saved all of those, and they've been in a little case there in the house. Since the house was redone. So it's kind of fun to see that. It might be Tarleton's, but who knows, who knows who it belonged to, but it's great. The house didn't come to the museum for 100 years after he was dead. So that's a long time.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. So you kind of alluded to this a little bit, Cindy, but I just want to reiterate this. History is a big deal to you.
Yes, sir.
Why is learning and understanding history so important? This is a very macro question.
Well, it takes up all of my air. So I don't know how other people feel about that. I'm married to a lit guy, and, and he always has history questions for me. I think that's why he married me. But I don't know how, I just wouldn't know how to organize what I'm going to do next without thinking about the history of it, or where did that come from, or why do people do things the way they do, or why are those boundaries there? I think that's natural to me, and I don't know where that came from. My parents were not history people. My grandparents were, but I didn't see much of them, so I don't know where you get that from, but it's the air I breathe, for real.
And Belle, you mentioned Dr. King, and he believed in history and the learning of history. Did he ever mention to you why it was so important to him?
I just know that he started keeping records and things when he was in high school. And, he was an English major. He was in World War II. He traveled, I believe, with Patton, and kind of was a personal secretary, or at least close to him. And so he sent letters back to his family that, that they cut the pieces out of. And when he retired, he came back here. And he really had a goal in his life to save what he could of the history of the county. and put it at the museum. His mother had been member of the 20th Century Club and very much into history. He's a very well-read man. He wrote articles, for Texas Monthly. He wrote a couple of books. And it was just so important to him. I wasn't that interested in history until he began to show me files and pictures and all the stuff he had documented. And, of course, all of that, not all of it, but when he passed away, Jack Anderson and I, who married Mary Ferguson, who's, also very important here at Tarleton, we helped get that to Tarleton. And he specifically wanted Tarleton to have the history of this county.
I love it. Okay, couple more questions for you guys, and thanks for doing this. This is one of the first episodes of Bleed Purple that we're recording, and I know you guys were a little bit nervous coming in, but you're doing great. Cindy, this one's for you, and I don't mean to put you on the spot. If you don't know the answer to this, we can skip over it. But Tarleton is in the A&M system, and it's the only school in the system that isn't Texas A&M Commerce or West Texas A&M. Why is that a thing? How was that a thing? Why was that important for John Tarleton to keep Tarleton State University the name of this university? Do you know the answer to that?
I think they would have violated the terms of his will.
That was just written in his will?
And the gift, yes, the college always had to bear his name. And so up until 1917, I think that's the year they changed the name, it had always been John Tarleton College or John Tarleton Agricultural College. And then in the last name change, they dropped the John part. So that's where JTAC for the newspaper comes from. Okay. John Tarleton Agricultural College.
Oh, well.
Yeah, so that was the terms of the will.
Well, I always thought that was so neat that it couldn't fall in line with all the other schools in the A&M system. And that's what really differentiates it from, there's a lot of things that differentiate it from the others.
They were the first ones too, so it's interesting that the other ones didn't follow suit with Tarleton. That's interesting.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's step away from John Tarleton just a minute. I want to talk about your feelings towards Tarleton State University. Again, we're telling the story of Tarleton through the stories of the people who bleed purple. And we talked about before we hit record, both of you guys bleed purple. Now, Belle, you didn't graduate from here. You attended here for a year and you went off to Tech, but you still bleed purple. And we're recording this and you've got your beautiful purple shirt on and you've got your, your shawl on. You look great in purple, but you have a heart for this university, even though you didn't graduate from here, don't you?
Yes, I do. I support the football team. I do a lot of advertising for the college. I hire your students at my store. So yes, I do.
What do you love most about Tarleton State University?
Well, I have sisters who graduated from here. They stayed. And because it was a friendly campus, it was, and this may sound old-fashioned, it was normal. It wasn't real progressive. It wasn't, how some schools were, you were from the country, you came here to school, and you fit in. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I have 3 sisters who graduated from here.
Cindy, what about you?
I came to Tarleton as a 30-something non-trad student, and it was just a friendly place. My aunt had gone to school here in the 60s. I think she lived at Lotta Moody, and I was just in love with her dorm room back in those days. But when I came, the people on campus worked with me. I was different. I had a kid. I was single. Life was hard. And the people in financial aid went out of their way to make sure that I got the kind of grants I needed. And I worked up in social science as their everything girl. One of the teachers I worked for was Dr. Grant. And he called me girly the whole time I worked there. He could never remember my name. And I made friends with my professors. I was closer to their age than some of the students and I miss seeing them. They've retired now or died and moved on. And I just always felt like I had a place here. And I met my husband here. He had been a student in the 70s and had come back and gotten some upper level degrees and went on to UNT. And Mark's been here on campus since 1990 as an instructor and now a professor. And we just, I mean, it's like the central part of our lives. So I don't know why we don't wear purple every day, but we don't. But it's there's never a day we don't talk about something that's happening at Tarleton or that happened in the old days or that we'd like to see happen again. It's changing fast these days, but it's still the same. It's still the same place. One of my nephews works at the dining hall. Yeah.
Okay, well, that was going to be my last question, but then you said something that made me think of one more, and that happens a lot on this podcast. I say I've got one question, I've got three or four
he
more.
promised me one question.
Okay, you said that you guys talk about, the way it used to be and how it is, but how you wanted it to get back to a certain way. What is one of those things that you would like to see come back?
I can tell you the thing that my husband misses most up on the third floor of the humanities building. Okay. They don't have a coffee room anymore.
Oh my gosh.
And so
necessary for
all
sure.
of the guys don't get together and, kick it every day. And I think that he's still coming to work every day. He's past retirement age. But I think he still hopes that day is going to return where the camaraderie among the staff's just gotten so big. So I don't know if we'll ever see that again. But other than that, it's still what Belle called. It's still a normal place. Yeah, Erath County's still a normal place, and I love it. I just wouldn't trade.
Thank you guys again for coming on this episode of Bleed Purple. If I wanted to find out more information about John Tarleton, what's the best resource for that out there, would you say?
They should probably find the Erath County website and the Historical Commission page, and they can drop me a note through their email, and I'll answer it because my material hasn't been published yet. And it's a lot of stuff.
I love it. Yeah, reach out to me, and you'll
reach
tell
out to me. I'll tell you. I'll tell you which one I know.
And Belle, this is kind of a rhetorical question for you to close things down. If you bleed purple, if you're listening to this podcast, is going by the museum grounds and seeing John Tarleton's ranch house a must?
I think so. And you can always call me at my store or call the chamber in the city. They'll give you my phone number, my personal phone number. And if you want a tour, we will give you a tour.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I may take you up on that.
Yeah. Oh, come on over.
I love it. Yeah. I love it. Cindy Shipman, Belle Dowell, on this episode of Bleed Purple. Again, the podcast that's telling the story of Tarleton State University through the stories of the people who bleed purple. I'm your host, Drew Myers. Thank you for listening.
Are you ready to take control of your financial future? Doug McLemore is the founder of McLemore Financial Group and a proud Tarleton graduate and supporter. The company specializes in providing personalized financial planning and investment strategies tailored just for you. Whether you're saving for retirement, planning for your child's education, or seeking to grow your wealth, their experienced advisors are here to guide you every step of the way. You can find them at 1529 West Lingleville Road in Stephenville or on the web at mclemoregroup.com. Or give them a call at 254-968-1020 to schedule your free consultation. McLemore Financial Group is your partner in financial success. Securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through McLemore Financial Group, a DBA of Advisor Resource Council, a registered investment advisor. McLemore Financial Group and Advisor Resource Council are separate entities from LPL Financial.